8. Natalie Bonnet. During the first stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, a 29-year-old Australian eyelash technician named Natalie Bonnet was stopped by police. She was making her way through a blockade in Wallen to get to work at the time, but that certainly didn't give her the go-ahead to bypass law enforcement. An officer told Bonnet that it was against the law to have her phone hooked to a car charger while attached to her windshield. He asked for her name and ID, but instead of handing it over, she asked to speak with a different officer instead, since the first one was making her feel deeply uncomfortable. Moments later, that same officer pulled Bonnet out of the vehicle while a passenger tried yanking her back inside. Bonnet later told 9 News that she didn't refuse to show her license, but that she simply refused to show it to that particular cop. She also said that she didn't feel safe getting out of the car, and that she didn't understand why the officer was even stopping her. If she knew that the cop was going to force her out of her vehicle, causing her clothes to rip and leaving her with scratches and bruises, Bonnet said she would have just followed orders. The woman denied allegations from social media commenters that she was a COVID conspiracy theorist and said that she actually suffers from anxiety. She learned the hard way that day that the rules apply to everyone. 7. Matthew Nicholson. It's not unusual for a grown man to throw a temper tantrum over a video game, but a 28-year-old California man named Matthew Nicholson took his anger way too far in 2018 after his gaming headset broke. A few days into the new year, officers responded to calls about a shooting at Matthew's home outside Modesto, where they found 68-year-old Lydia Nicholson clinging to life after being shot in the head. She passed away a short while later at a local hospital. According to investigators, Lydia heard Matthew yelling in his room and went to check on him. They argued, and at some point, Matthew lost his temper and broke his headset, which he immediately blamed his mother for. He threatened to kill his parents, then grabbed a handgun and shot Lydia in the head. A family friend told Fox 40 that Matthew also tried to shoot his 81-year-old father, Loren, but the weapon jammed. Loren wrestled the firearm away from his son and called 911 while the suspect fled to a relative's house. He was arrested later during a traffic stop. Matthew pleaded guilty to murder and assault with a firearm and was sentenced to 27 years in prison for the unnecessary attack. 6. Casey Garcia. 31-year-old Casey Garcia believes security at her daughter's middle school in El Paso County, Texas needed to be improved. So, she disguised herself as her child one day in 2021 and spent almost the entire day going to her daughter's classes before someone finally realized what was happening. She later said in a YouTube video that staff members seemed too preoccupied with monitoring students' phone use than confirming her identity. Given Garcia's petite 4'11", 105-pound frame, it's not surprising that she was mistaken for a child by most of the school's employees. But she found it concerning that it took so long for someone to take a close enough look to identify her. At one point, she even said she was the only person in the classroom, and the teacher still didn't realize she wasn't her daughter. In her video, the concerned mum apologized to the school district and its staff, stating that she thinks they're wonderful people and is sorry it had to be them. Garcia's message and other social media posts were meant to raise awareness, but they triggered a police investigation instead. Authorities charged her with criminal trespassing and tampering with government records. While the outcome of the case is unclear, it's probably safe to say that she went about her activism the wrong way and inadvertently focused the spotlight on herself instead of the school's shortcomings. 5. LaShawn Duffy. The exact nature of the relationship between 28-year-old LaShawn Duffy and 40-year-old Sergio Ramirez is unknown. But things went sour between the two in 2022 when Duffy got angry with Ramirez for sleeping around. He also suspected her of destroying some of his belongings, including comic books and a video game console. Instead of taking a rational approach and moving on with his life, Duffy seemed hell-bent on getting revenge. During the morning one day, he allegedly confronted Ramirez in front of her apartment in Brooklyn's Cypress Hills neighborhood and robbed her friend who was standing with her. According to prosecutors, Duffy then went out and bought twine, lighter fluid, and a lighter. Authorities believe he then returned and beat Ramirez up, tied her to a chair, dumped lighter fluid on her, and lit her on fire before leaving her to burn alive in the apartment. A witness reportedly saw the assault happen but failed to intervene. By the time emergency responders arrived, Ramirez was dead. Police finally tracked down and arrested Duffy over 2 months after the homicide. He was charged with first and second-degree murder as well as robbery. The case is still ongoing. 4. Kevin Love. Some basketball fans describe Kevin Love as a standout NBA player, while others are less impressed. Still, most agree that he's good at the sport and a valuable team member. Another thing people seem united on is their disgust at his immature and diva-like behavior during a few games in the 2019-2020 season. At the time, Love was a forward for the Cleveland Cavaliers and was caught in an ongoing feud with the team's coach, John Beilein, who was later replaced. On New Year's Eve 2019, Love lost his temper during a game against the Toronto Raptors and received a fine. Then, during a losing game against the Oklahoma City Thunders days later, he threw up his hands in disgust multiple times at his teammates, angrily firing a hard pass and turning his back on the defense. He also got into an argument with the team's manager, Kobe Altman, since he was mad about being fined for the Toronto game. Love initially accused the media of exaggerating the alleged heated nature of this conversation, which came during long-running rumors that he was going to be traded from the team. But he eventually realized his behavior was unacceptable and publicly apologized in a tweet, admitting that he was acting childish. He put the cringe-worthy series of bratty displays behind him and continued playing for the Cavaliers until early 2023, when he instead signed with the Miami Heat. 3. James Pack. In 2012, single mum Susan Johnson found what seemed like the perfect apartment for her and her 2 children after a difficult search. Located in Biddeford, Maine, it was attached to the home of her new landlord James Pack and his wife. They were an older couple who seemed easygoing and respectable. But it wasn't long before Pack began nitpicking Susan. He complained about where her son Derek Thompson parked his vehicle. When the boy's girlfriend, Olivia, spent the night, Pack accused the family of violating their rental agreement, which supposedly prohibited them from having people move in without permission. The fact that he paid close enough attention to notice the young woman made the family feel like their privacy was being violated, and as time went on, the landlord's complaints became more frequent and obsessive. He was also short-tempered, which seemed childish at first, but became increasingly threatening as his hatred of the tenants escalated. One day, Pack allegedly barged into the apartment and threatened Derek because he disapproved of the way the teen shoveled snow. Pack's wife, Amit, realized that her husband's behavior was irrational. She even apologized to Susan and her kids several times. But she was powerless to stop Pack from continuing his angry campaign. Susan and her kids soon realized that the only way to make the torment stop was to move. They couldn't find a new place to live overnight though, but they began searching. In the meantime, Pack decided he had to evict the family. One day, after a more explosive confrontation with her landlord, Susan called the police. She showed responding officers recordings of Pack's threats and harassment, but they told her to work things out in civil court. As they left, Pack yelled that he had nothing to lose, that they would see him in the newspaper soon, and that it's going to be a bloody mess. Despite being within earshot, the police simply left the scene. Just moments later, Pack entered Susan's apartment with a gun and started shooting. Susan was shot but survived, and her younger son hid in a back room. Derek and Olivia were unfortunately shot dead. Pack was charged with first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity but was found competent. To avoid making his family suffer through lengthy court proceedings, he pleaded guilty to all charges in early 2016 and got 2 life sentences. Even after admitting to his crimes, he never showed remorse, so he went to prison stubbornly believing that he was the true victim. 2. The tantrum at Stanford. In early 2023, students at Stanford Law, the second most prestigious law school in the US, invited US Circuit Court Judge Kyle Duncan to give a lecture called COVID, Guns, and Twitter. Duncan agreed to the discussion, which was meant to focus on how the decisions of his court have affected the higher Supreme Court. Of course, not everyone at the school agrees with the judge's decisions or the values they reflect. After all, it's impossible to agree with everyone, especially when it comes to politics and government. But instead of sitting through the lecture, the students who disliked Duncan complained to Tyrion Steinbach, the school's Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. In an email to the Stanford community, Steinbach wrote that Duncan repeatedly and proudly threatened healthcare and basic rights for marginalized communities, including LGBTQ+ people, Native Americans, immigrants, prisoners, black voters, and women. If that's true, it's understandable why some people didn't like him and didn't want him to speak at the university. But many people deny that Duncan supports prejudice policies, and while Steinbach clearly isn't a fan of the judge, she didn't take action to cancel his speaking engagement. She also said that she wasn't going to get in the way of students' right to protest and resolved to take a hands-off approach. Duncan tried in vain to give his speech, but was repeatedly drowned out by insults from protesters. There were 5 administrators present during the chaotic assembly, but none of them tried quieting the angry students down. When the judge asked officials to get the crowd under control, Steinbach spent several minutes delivering lamenting remarks from her portfolio, which included allegations that his presence was tearing at the fabric of the community, hurting students, and denying them of their rights. After trying and failing to get a word in for nearly 30 minutes, Duncan gave up. He later described the engagement as a therapy session from hell and said it felt like a setup. Like with all things political in the US, the incident deepened the divide between groups that hold opposing beliefs. Many people felt like Duncan got what he deserved, while others believe that his inability to deliver his thoughts represents a troubling restriction of free speech. The people who are angry at how the event turned out don't even necessarily share the same views as the judge, but they support his right to express himself freely, and they're equally troubled by the protesters' actions. The incident poses bigger questions on where to draw the line between rightfully shunning hateful speech and unfairly silencing someone because they might say something offensive but isn't necessarily illegal or explicitly prejudiced. 1. Amy Harrington. In 2022, 38-year-old Amy Harrington allegedly drove drunk one night and was almost home when she rear-ended another car in Madeira Beach, Florida. Responding deputies noticed that her eyes were glassy and red and that her pupils were very dilated, leading them to suspect that she was under the influence. According to an arrest report, Harrington struggled to follow simple instructions during a field sobriety test and was unsteady on her feet and almost falling when attempting to walk in a straight line. In body cam footage of the conversation, a deputy was heard asking Harrington to walk the line and then saying, "Do you want to pay attention so I can give you the instructions?" Harrington replied with a sarcastic tone, telling the deputy that he sounded like her dance coach. She proceeded to take 5 steps down the line and transitioned seamlessly into a drunken ballet sequence. Unamused, the deputy said, "That wasn't the exercise that I was demonstrating." His remark did little to stop Harrington from busting a move, as she changed up her style to what local news station WFLA described as a ballet/Irish folk hybrid dance. She later refused testing, similarly to how she behaved during a traffic stop in 2019, and she was charged with driving under the influence, with both property damage and refusal to submit to testing. Thanks for watching. Would you rather go viral online for throwing an immature tantrum at a barista who made your coffee wrong, or for saying extremely cruel things to your ex until they cried in public? Let me know in the comments below.